Have you noticed how the world of advertising feels more chaotic than ever? When Omnicom announced they were buying Interpublic, I was struck by the fact that this seemed more desperate than celebratory. No doubt it's a seismic move in the ad world as the big holding companies scramble to stay relevant. But when these giants joined forces, I felt it was a sign the traditional agency model was straining to keep up with a world that increasingly demands speed, adaptability, and cultural relevance over strategy and slow production pipelines. With brands reaching us across countless platforms and market dynamics shifting at lightning speed, brands today are under pressure to do more and to do it faster. Marketing dollars are moving away from big advertising agencies to specialist agencies. So, is it possible to create an agency that's a specialist in everything? What does an agency look like that can actually deliver creative solutions across formats at scale? You're listening to the Kubrick Labs podcast, where we speak to the people who turn creativity into industry. Today, we're digging into a big question. What do brands really need right now, and how do you build an agency that's ready to deliver for them? To unpack that, I'm joined by Tom Dunlap, co-founder and chief content officer of Superbloom House, a new breed of agency that's rethinking everything from creative to production to post. Superbloom's model puts a producer on equal footing with the heads of strategy and creative. They're blending a collective of top-tier creators with a nimble, tech-forward production pipeline, all designed to help brands show up faster and smarter across every platform. In this episode, we discuss why today's fractured media landscape demands agencies that can pivot quickly and execute strategy across mediums, how Superbloom's hybrid model is breaking down traditional silos between creativity, production, and strategy, and how their creative collective, a hand-picked team of world-class creators spanning music producers, showrunners, designers, and influencers, gives them the ability to mobilize instantly for any kind of project in any kind of medium. We'll also get into the surprising power of giving producers a true creative seat at the table, and why that might be the secret to making brand work that's released fast enough to be culturally relevant and actually cuts through. So if you're curious about what the future of agencies might look like and how to build one that works for the new reality of advertising, stick around. Thanks for doing this. I'm really excited to chat with you because, A, you're a friend. You've been a mentor to me. You were the person who sort of got me out of the editing room and into being a producer. So you very quite literally changed my life, and now you're a client at Kubrick Labs. And I've been really getting to see what you're doing at Superbloom up close. Because it seems to me that you've kind of taken all of the most difficult things and put them together and actually made them work. The kind of production company, agency, strategy, brand consulting hybrid with robust post-production pipeline and all, and the creative collective. I mean, can you just start by explaining what Superbloom House is and what it does?
Well, the positioning of Superbloom is we are a creative company and production company built to unearth the unexpected. So my business partner is Bryony McCarthy, and she and I met at a previous company called Etcha Studios, which was born out of 72 and Sunny. And we're sort of an unlikely pair that was put together. I come from production, both on the agency side, as you know. Orlando, spent years on the physical production side, working with Ridley and Tony at RSA and Scott Free and across their companies, but always around marketing and advertising and brands. Bryony's journey was a little bit different. She, again, always around brands and marketing, but from the media side. And at the time that she and I met, we were both looking at the industry, and there was this fundamental change that was happening with the way that brands were communicating to their audiences and their consumers. Advertising was still alive and well, 30-second spot, 6-second spot, print ads, and out of home and all those things still to this day, still very relevant in the media mix. But there was this whole other world that was happening with the multi-channel networks, the machinimas, and all the MCNs that were popping up around BuzzFeed and Virtue and Vice and Fox, right? These were new channels of communication for brands, and ones that were taking a huge share of the storytelling and the marketing opportunities that we were doing on the advertising side. We both noticed that traditional ad agencies were not taking advantage of those spaces. They weren't thinking about digital and social content. They weren't thinking about publishing. They weren't thinking about partnering with creators that were to amplify their stories, not just influencers, but the types of people that are making the work. That's where Vice had so much value, is they were creating content for an audience by people that were in those audiences and about people that those audiences were interested in. And so there was this giant hole in the market, and we saw brands shifting media dollars into those spaces. And both of us saw that opportunity, and we kind of looked around the landscape of advertising, and there really wasn't a company that was successfully sitting in the middle between those two. There were ad agencies still doing ad work. There were publishers doing publishing work and working directly with brands, but there really wasn't an entity that was bridging that gap and also doing it through the lens of what was right for the business objectives that our brands were trying to get across. And so that was really the opportunity that she and I saw when we founded Superbloom, coming out of our previous company. And we really looked at it as a way to redefine how brands create and produce content in an ever-changing media landscape. We saw the opportunity to really build a company that really seamlessly blended the idea of creativity through the voices and the lens of the people that were speaking to consumers through those channels, and blending that with a production entity that was built to execute that work and deliver those bold, unexpected ideas through the correct strategic lenses that brands need to solve their business challenges. So that was really the impetus of Superbloom and where we started. It was really, first and foremost, creative and production coming together to deliver those types of solutions to those brands. Then we had to figure out how we do that and built a creative and a production model around that.
What I find very interesting is that normally when you start a company that's a little bit different shape, usually it's different in only one of its sides, and that's your then USP. What's remarkable to me about Superbloom is that it does quite a few things all at once, which is usually a recipe for a disaster. Pretty much every producer at some point over a beer has been like, you know what we should do? We should have a company where we just have this like list of great creative people that we work with and we can draw on for any number of things. And you know what we should do? We should start an agency that's production first. And you know what we should do? We should handle all of our own post-production and bring that in-house so that we're doing all of our media end to end. And so many people have started trying to do any one of those things as a USP and failed, and that actually you've succeeded by doing all of them at once, which seems both counterintuitive and incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it really is interesting. It is a very difficult model because our industry, the craft and the creative and the work is still the thing. You can have all the best strategy. You can think about all the high, mid, low funnel work. You can program the shit out of it. You can, spend a ton of money making it and a ton of money putting into media to boost it and get it out to the world. But at the end of the day, if it's crappy content, then it's not going to work, right? So while, a big thing for me has always been talent. I grew up in this industry working at incredible ad agencies like Shia Day and Wieden+Kennedy, where craft was at the center of everything we do. And there's a whole industry built around servicing that craft. And for so long, it did a great job. The commercial production industry did an incredible job at servicing agencies and bringing new and interesting and relevant directorial and creator talent into the fold. But that's also a very narrow lane. I always found it a little bit crazy for producers when you just rely on someone else's point of view for the work. Hollywood doesn't work that way. Hollywood is about developing not only creative, but developing the type of people you're working with. And there are no handovers. There's no pass-offs like there are in advertising. There's no like writer and art director sitting in a room going, okay, we did our job, time to hand it off to the director to do theirs. No, the writer and the director and all of that, they start at the very beginning. So I always found that to be kind of crazy that you wouldn't involve the people that are making the work from the very beginning of a project. And if you could find a way to condense and combine that process of the development of work with the people that are going to make it, that just felt like a really strong model, right? And one that we've put into practice in other ways. When I was working at RSA, we had this incredible roster of talent, and there was a commercial production model that was being fed, right, by brands and by agencies. But then there was all these brands that were coming to us, like from the outside going, I want what Ridley and that team of people are doing. How can I access that world without an ad agency, right? I've got my ad over here, but I need a reality show, or I need a documentary, or I need a digital series. I need an explainer video. I need something, but I want it done well. And I want to work with the people that are doing that. They want to work with brands. They see an opportunity to play and experiment, expand their storytelling, but they don't, they didn't know how to get to brands, and brands didn't know how to get to them. And so just harnessing the power of that world, we were making incredible things. We were making documentary features and shows and developing video games. And I sort of saw like there's this whole world left to be harnessed that our colleagues in the commercial production industry aren't tapping because they're not relevant to tap in a business model. And so when I got into this model at Superbloom, being able to harness that power and to tap those alternative creative voices sort of made a lot of sense when you are trying to harness culture. You're trying to harness the conversation that's happening in digital and social channels. Why would you go to a commercial director whose whole soul craft is making commercials when you're trying to build a digital content series for, that looks and feels like entertainment that consumer might be engaging with, on, whatever form they are out in the world? Why not call that person and see if they want to do the work, right? And so we found ourselves gathering this community. Like that's how we got our work done, right? And it was not only a survival tactic, but it was also a creative tactic, by bringing in showrunners like Evan Rosenfeld to work on the NFL. This is a guy that's made like 5 30 for 30s all around, ESPN's, football storytelling. Why not bring him into an NFL project to get under the skin, like true, authentic storytelling around, NFL football players? Or we're doing it on a content series around menopause. Why wouldn't we go to documentarian women who tell incredible stories, from the point of view of women that are experiencing this? Like those people aren't available in the open market. You got to find them and harness them, tap them. So that was sort of, as we saw that happening with Superbloom and sort of accessing that network, we decided to formalize it. And that was really the Creative Collective. And that is the Creative Collective and how we do it. But in order to activate those people, you've also got to activate all those production things around it. You got to have a full service production team, to shoot it, to produce it. You got to have post-production. Otherwise, you're just it's just going out the door and handing off. This way you have control over it. You have control over the product. You can invest where you need to invest. You can push back where you need to push back. And you always know where the dollars are going.
You mentioned in there, obviously you spent time at Ridley Scott and Associates, RSA, being an executive producer. One of the first people I knew to kind of move into that world of what we now call branded entertainment. But to be honest, I've always kind of felt that branded entertainment is the hardest thing to do. I mean, making entertainment, something that people really want to seek out and watch is incredibly hard. People are trying to do it every day and a lot of things fall flat. Making good branded things that not only work as something to watch, but also have a brand identity associated with them, have a, brand's values and messaging and positioning associated with it. That's incredibly hard, making a piece of media that does that. Doing branded entertainment seems like the hardest of both of those things sort of brought together to make something exponentially hard.
What I learned about branded entertainment back then and what we know now is entertainment is still such a valuable thing for audiences, right? And if a brand can meet an audience where they're at with a story, a perspective, then it can be very valuable. And branded entertainment can take many different forms, right? And the best entertainment, what I've learned, is when a brand is inherently woven into the fabric of the content, right? It's not a marketing vehicle for a message. It's not you're not selling something through it, right? You're actually using it as its own cultural moment to be able to brand around that content. Take what Netflix has done with Formula One and Drive to Survive. That is probably the greatest example of branded entertainment. I don't know what their brief was, but what I do know is that series opened up Formula One to an audience, especially here in the US, that never knew that existed, because the times of those races are in the middle of the night, and they're in Europe and Monaco and Asia and whatever. So it wasn't really a thing for the US to engage with. But as soon as they created entertainment out of there, and you saw the intrigue, you saw the storytelling, you saw the drivers, you saw the action, that opened up a whole new audience that now F1 can brand around. They can bring races to the US, sell against those, those drivers are now, known quantities and brands in their own right.
It's funny because it did take, the biggest bug of Formula One was you had to know the drama, you had to give a crap about the drivers, you had to know what their inner squabbles were to enjoy the race. Netflix lent into that. That's what became the thing that made people love it, is that suddenly you care about Charles Leclerc getting pushed off the track by Max Verstappen.
You have context for it, right? But I think that is the great lesson, is they created a cultural moment that now F1 can leverage in a bunch of new markets and a bunch of new funnels around their brand. And that's what we try to do too with our brands. And again, that's why we created the Creative Collective, because a large part of the collective itself are people from Hollywood, showrunners and producers, folks that are engaging day in and day out with the entertainment world and creating the type of content that audiences are rabid for. Chris Van Dusen, for example, is one of the creators and the showrunner Bridgerton. He's one of our core Creative Collective members. And when we have brands like Marriott Bonvoy, for an example, that are looking at what's happening in the travel industry around the White Lotuses and how that's changing, and they can get access now to a guy like Chris Van Dusen, who's used to telling period pieces and pieces about locations and stories and humans. Like, giving them access to a talent like that is a huge opportunity. Or like what we're doing right now with Virgin Voyages. We have a show called Mystery Voyage with them, which was developed out of our Creative Collective with a reality show production company called Purveyors of Pop, are masters at, that Bravo-esque, deep storytelling, combining them with Richard Branson's cruise line to tell a murder mystery reality show on a boat. That is creating a cultural moment for Virgin Voyages to be around. And they're not even having to pay for that they're just providing the backdrop. A network or a streamer is going to benefit because they're getting an incredible show.
Yeah.
It's
better than earned media. It's paid for media. Yeah.
But it's being done. And this is what I learned, is in order to create those cultural moments, you got to work with the people that know how to do it. Right. And that's why, again, going back to our Creative Collective, why we built it the way we did, so that we can access and harness that power and not just be like smoke and mirrors about it, but legitimately put the people in the room who are making this happen. And that's another lesson that I learned is, brands need that credibility. They're not going to look at Superbloom and be like, oh, you're a 4-year-old company. What do you mean you do TV shows, right? No, this is Superbloom providing the platform for Purveyors of Pop and Virgin Voyages to come together to create something very, very special.
That's quite incredible. And I think that you're absolutely right. I think that, each of these disciplines, whether it's entertainment or television or content, we're one of the groups that I think has been most sort of maligned by the creative community are YouTube content creators. And the simple fact is, it is undeniable that when they're successful, they understand that medium in a way that most people don't. And I think that's true of showrunners. It's certainly true of filmmakers. It just gives you slightly different instincts. And it's important to be using the experts.
Well, there's different forms of storytelling, as you just said. What you see on Instagram versus what's happening on YouTube versus what's happening on Netflix are three completely different things, and require not only different inputs to get those relevant outputs, but it requires that point of view and that experience. And, a lot of folks can learn and stumble into it. But when you're trying to bring credibility to a project and have a brand engage with it and pay for it, they need some receipts. They need to know, like, hey, this this woman has made these documentary films, and that's why she's the right person for this project.
And I think that, that person getting the opportunity to work with somebody like you, where I think that one of the biggest responsibilities of the production process in the advertising community is not just being creative, but it's being creative in little pockets that those approvals and standards can be sent through a corporate entity up the chain of approvals and come back in time to still be able to be actioned. A film production only has to make the director happy. A commercial film production has to make the creative, the CMO, the founder. It has to go up these rounds of approvals at every stage. And that naturally obligates a different type of work.
There's two types of producers, and you know this, Orlando. There's the ones that are project managers, right? They're just pushing something, through a schedule and hitting timelines, ensuring things are on budget. And then are those that enhance the creative product, right? That contribute to it, that drive it, that have a point of view about what is being executed, just not the nuts and bolts of a schedule and the deliverables list, right? And that's where, like, I've always been, and the teams that we've worked with, you were that way and are that way. The people that we worked with together and grew up with and moved through this industry are all the types of creatives, producers that are helping to evolve the creative idea into its final form through the packaging of talent, through the packaging of production strategies, and through the alignment and the partnership with the folks that are developing the creative and being a crucial part of that experience. Those are two different roles, and those people exist in our industries, and they both succeed very well. I wanted to build a company that was made with the latter, the folks that I wanted a creative company where producers had the same amount of impact on the out as the creatives do. We're not in service to the creatives. We are part of the creative process. And in a lot of ways, we are driving the creative strategy because of our, production strategic thinking of how we're going to make something and ultimately who's going to make it, because those two things are just as important now as what we make.
It's been really interesting for me to, just coming into Superbloom. Obviously, we're now working with you, and but you've been open since before we have worked together, and it's been very impressive for me to see how much you have cared about your, the technology you're using and the technology workflows that you're using, and how much you've seemed to care about that since day one. And I know you've always been sort of quite tech forward. What's interesting to me is how you're also responding with the ability to kind of spin up post facilities quite quickly, whether, for clients, for, your own use, but making sure that you are incredibly responsive. And that goes all the way through your workflow, from being able to respond very quickly to production briefs and being able to sort of get teams together, teams build incredibly quickly, but then also immediately have that production team supported by, offline facilities, offline personnel, the ability to sort of get that accessible. You're creating the ability to immediately spot create editing suites and post-production suites wherever your clients need them. That's an incredibly robust pipeline to just be there ready to access at any moment. What drove you to understand the necessity of that tech forward approach from day one?
Well, we started Superbloom during the pandemic, right? And that was amazing for a number of reasons, because one, starting a new company, didn't need offices.
And just to get a timeline, just before, 2020, bang in the middle of it, coming out of it, what was that timeline?
The impetus of Superbloom really started in 2020, even before the pandemic. What we were building at Echo, and ultimately what the vision that Brownie and I had for this type of company was pre-pandemic, right? We were already thinking about what this model would look like in an independent setting, right? The thing that made it work was when we started Superbloom, April 2021, April 1st, 2021. I had already gone through the the challenge and the experience of building virtual pipelines for specifically post-production and creative environments, because we couldn't be together, right? I had already had this post house I'd built with, 20 edit bays and recording studios and shooting stages. And all of a sudden, overnight, we had to pivot to work virtually. We had already put systems in place, but we hadn't optimized them. And we had about 2 weeks to really get that up and running, and we did. And it was the learnings from that workflow that gave Bryony and I the confidence to say, we could actually start Superbloom during a pandemic and live the totality of the model that we want to put into place because of the speed at which that technology, cloud-based production and post-production had moved, and the comfort levels around it. The way that creatives and editors and directors had learned and producers had learned to work with it, right? So we knew we could start a different type of company in a really different time because we had firsthand front row experience with what that technology could do. And it wasn't that expensive to spin up. We had learned, we'd already gone through the trials and tribulations of these things. So when we started Superbloom, we were able to get up and running very, very fast. And technology became a cornerstone of the company we were building in order to be able to do business, to be able to create revenue flow immediately with it. And so technology played a very important role in that. And we were able to take those learnings from the pandemic and go, okay, what's the 2.0 and the 3.0 version of that? And that's what we want. That's the future phase and the future state of Superbloom and our ability to, work efficiently, work quickly, and be up and running really, really fast. That was really having a point of view on technology. Bryony jokes all the time because I'm, the cloud-based systems and things like that, like they work and they're there, and I'm really proud of that, but they work because they're non-existent and nobody knows they're there, right? So the way building the infrastructure we did was, and how we did it just became super important. Now it has informed our business model. And it has not only allowed us to get revenue up and running and move quickly and provide craft and access, great talent around the world to be able to work with us. It's also been the differentiator in projects that we have won. We did a what we call a social newsroom for the Sundance Film Festival last year, where we were on the ground for the first 6 days of the festival, broadcasting and creating content daily for them. Their challenge was being in Utah in the mountains, snowing. They wanted to get what was happening on the ground to audiences on social channels. Within minutes of that happening, we were able to take our workflow and set it up in Park City and be able to, without really anything, an internet connection, right? And to be able to plug in. And that was the opus of what our system was built to do, for us to be able to get on an airplane in LA, land in Park City, plug a couple things in, and be creating content, from the, center of the universe there.
And I think that, so much of it as well is the security of all that, because I think that that's one of the things. It's quite easy to kind of go cloud-based with a lot of post-production now. It's very difficult to do it incredibly securely. And I think especially when you're talking about the types of clients that you work with, and especially when you start moving into, entertainment-based clients and people like that, what you're talking about is, very sensitive media assets and strategic assets that need to be deployed very quickly, but incredibly securely. And that is something that I think a lot of people forget to handle properly. And I think that, that's certainly something that you guys have done incredibly well.
Well, that speaks to our ambitions, of the type of creative company and agency that we wanted to build and the types of clients we wanted to work with. I grew up in gaming. I grew up around Apple. I grew up around Nike. These are all companies that, protect their intellectual property at the most highest level. So if I'm spending money, as an entrepreneur and a business owner, investing our money in technology solutions, I sure as hell want those technology solutions to be future forward. So I can stand in front of, Activision and be like, absolutely can keep your data secure. You can absolutely give me your dev builds. Here's our tech stack. Here's how it's divided. Here's our security protocol. Here's the insurances we have in place. I've gone through that enough to know that we needed it, right? I was no spring chicken here.
Yeah.
Been through
Yeah,
enough.
because you were at TBWA Shy Day doing all of the Apple stuff, and there's no pipeline more secure than the Apple pipeline. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
working with them and having to have cameras on our safe, you know, that's where the hard drives went, and there had to be, you know, I mean, both digital but also very serious, you know, physical security.
Well, yeah, and you think about, you know, whether it's Apple or gaming, tech, you know, even like Coke, you know, they're launching Coke Zero. Like they sure as heck don't need one of their competitors seeing what they're doing. And so that, you know, listen, it goes back to the of like the idea of what was the founding principles of Superbloom, which is, you know, how you make and who you make it with is just as important as what you make. How you make it, that's the tech stack. That's everything from technology and how it's set up and how fluid it is and how you can engage with internal teams at brands in their studios to the types of creative talent and the things that are coming out of it. It's all encompassing of all of those things because ultimately, like, that's all part of the solutions. There are things that we do because of our technology solutions and our sort of, you know, our business perspective that other production companies and agencies will never be able to do. We win business because of this. It's an advantage and a differentiator that allows us to win business, move quickly, spin up, produce great quality content, offer, you know, competitive pricing because of the ways that we've thought about that sort of baseline infrastructure.
Yeah, I've never seen an agency quite so responsive as Superbloom. It's incredibly impressive how quickly you guys can move.
Yeah.
Everything from onboarding to spinning up a project to spinning up all the resources that are required for that project.
Yeah.
So quickly.
Thank you. It's table stakes. I mean, that I think speaks to my business partner and the world she comes from the media side of being able to move at the speed of, you know, audiences and social channels and things like that.
It's interesting to me because there's been a lot of talk about how AI is stifling creativity. And I was having a conversation with Dav Karbassian the other day, and we briefly got into Omnicom bringing production in-house, but in-house to the holding company, not in-house to the agency. So although it's moving up in the chain, it's getting one step removed from the creativity, which I think, you know, anybody who's kind of seen that sort of move agrees that it's not going to lead to better work. You know, the output is not going to be improved. And it was interesting to me because I just thought we talk a lot about how AI might, you know, hamper and stifle creativity, but we don't often talk about how human systems as well, if you get them wrong, can hamper and stifle creativity, or they can vastly augment creativity. And, you know, for you, just going through the places you've worked, you know, senior producer at TBWA Shy Day, director of integrated production at Wieden+Kennedy Amsterdam, senior vice president of production at Deutsch, executive producer and head of branded content at Ridley Scott and Associates, chief production officer at 72 and Sunny. You know, these are places that have incredibly robust human systems that support creativity. The term culture comes up a lot, and I just think of culture as really how a human system responds and is able to make creativity work. What do you think that you understand now about how to build a culture?
I think that, you know, the human element of creativity is still the most powerful thing that there is. The systems, the tools, and the processes that enable the output should make the job of executing the right type of work should enable that to happen so the right type of work is made at the highest creative level possible. To give those teams the tools. And I think that you have to have production and creative together as part of the culture. It has to be the culture. Those two things cannot be decoupled because they just can't. They simply can't. Schedules and budgets are creative deliverables, not just the job of production. Creatives need to know what their timelines are, what their, you know, what the budgets have in them, the tools and the processes and the production strategies, you know, that are being deployed to execute their work. And conversely, producers need to be able to shape the creative product in order to make the deliverables and the things that need to be made. In fact, they need to be just as strategic and just as creative as the creatives do. Like we put those two things together. And actually, a lot of times, production is leading creative. You have $1 million to make, and you need to make 100 assets. Here's a way to do it. And that becomes a production strategy that informs a creative strategy that ultimately informs creative ideas, and then ultimately who's going to be making those ideas. So you can't decouple that. Once you put those together in the right way, you can do what those holding companies are trying to do, which is commoditize and monetize production. It's okay to do that. Like, it's okay. It's okay for you're not going to make you're not going to be making work at the detriment of your client because you're doing it in-house, or you're doing this and you're not having the commercial production company objectively do it. If you have the right creative and production strategies going in and you're enabling those things to be made, there's a lot of money to be made, as well as great work. There's a lot of efficiencies to be had. You're actually potentially saving your clients money that way. There used to be kind of an idea that, the AICP, for an example, always felt that agencies taking work in-house was at the detriment of the client because it was putting profits above a creativity. Maybe so back in the day when we were spinning up in-house post houses, and I know that a lot of the holding companies are really investing heavily in post because they see it as low-hanging fruit, and it is because of tools and AI. But ultimately, if you were to look at the full funnel of that, and you put the cultures together in the right way, and you give them the right tools, then you can make more money, you can do better work for your client. Ultimately, everybody wins. Problem is talent, the access to great talent, the access to editors, the access to directors. It's hard to do, right? And that's why we had to build the Creative Collective as our answer to that, because we needed a workforce to be able to live that. There's not a lot of companies out there that have invested that time, that energy to build that talent workforce, to be able to enable that and give that system credibility, because ultimately it does come down to the best work and the best people making the work. And if you don't have that, then you are going to be at the detriment of your client.
Yeah.
But you have to have those people together. You've got to have producers and creatives still to this day. And you've got to give producers a bigger seat at the table.
Producers need to be as creative in finding the answers as creatives need to be about finding the right creative answer for a brief. It's two sides of a very similar coin.
Yeah, production needs to be part of that brief too. I can't stress that more. And we talk about this with our strategists at Superbloom too, which is how production can help strategy define ultimately what gets made.
I mean, it was years before I even met a strategist, and then I was so fascinated by what they do. But it also means that if the producer at the end understands the strategy, you get fewer producers and people downstream going, well, I don't understand why it has to be like that. This is what's going to make the best film and whatever else. And if you go, well, actually, this feeds into a strategy that we need to respect because it's our strategy.
Yeah. You have to think about all the parts, and that burden shouldn't necessarily always fall on the traditional creative team to figure out. Like, it's not fair, and that's where having the right culture around a project, we call them pods, and all of our pods have creative and production together. You can move seamlessly through a project and have all of those angles figured out when you're designing a production moment. You're going into how are we designing the shoot to be able to gather and capture all the things that we need to get, when we're thinking about lower funnel, mid funnel work, broadcast spot, the print ad, and all the content.
Yeah, gone are the days of just doing the 60 and being like, well, we'll cut it up and we'll get all of the assets from various cuts of that 60.
Right there is one of the biggest, frustrations that drove the creation of Superbloom, which was, the fact that how production and media had to okay, we got a 60-second thing. We've got to figure out what to do with this now. When actually we don't need a 60-second thing. We need 36-second things. Oh, but here we are. We got this big, cool piece of advertising that we can't do anything with, Now we got to carve up and pretend to make work. That's just the antithesis of what brands need these days for their communication. I mean, sometimes that works and sometimes that's what's necessary. And we wind up with those briefs, but that's not the stuff that gets us up in the morning.
I've kept you long enough, but I am going to just ask you one last question that I've been asking everybody. And as you know, the great Dan Wieden, who was, much more your boss than mine, but he was all of our bosses at Wieden+Kennedy. But yeah, he had a great quote where he said, "You're useless to me unless you failed big at least twice." And I always love that because I think that it made there was one time I messed up pretty big, and when I walked into your office, I thought I was going to get a bollocking, and instead you just looked at me, and you could tell that I had been beating myself up, and you just went, "Well, what did we learn?" And I really appreciated that. Can you think, and would you be willing to admit a time that you messed up and what you learned from it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many things, but there was one moment in particular that I hold true to this day and age, and I don't consider it a mess up, more as a missed opportunity. Like, what I hate is when you have something special and you don't exploit it for everything it could possibly be. Not every moment of things we do in advertising are game changing, creative that gets you on the stage at Cannes. But everything we do touch is a creative opportunity. And if not exploited properly and to its full extent, then what's the point, right? And I actually go back to what Lee Clow versus Dan used to say to me, which is good enough is not enough. That was my early mantras. And there was a time when, back in the days when you started out as a broadcast producer, as I was at Chiat+Day, you were kind of given, you assisted on the big projects and you were kind of given things like radio to do. Radio is super fun to produce. And I used to love to do all the things that no one else wanted to do. And radio was one of them because I could go hang out in a really cool recording studio and work with actors and play. And it was me and a writer, and that was it. And we were creative and
bringing you coffee and snacks all the time.
Yeah,
it's great.
That was fun too, but it was more the creative process.
Of course.
You're like creating, and like producers, that was just you and a writer, right? And we were doing I was probably 23 at the time, 24. I was doing I think a radio ad for Taco Bell, the Chihuahua, and it was like a cross promotion with the Godzilla movie that was coming out, and probably trace that back to like 1998 or some stupid thing like that. But it was all about Godzilla attacking New York, and the Chihuahua was like there to save the day, and he had an army with him. I'm a huge Stanley Kubrick fan, and like I was thinking about Full Metal Jacket and all these things, and the drill instructor in that, and I was like, oh man, wouldn't it be great if we get the drill instructor, Arlie Ermy for this, he could be in the role. And I was like, I kind of just like thought about it, and I was like, oh, that's a lot of work. I got to call agents and I got to do that. And I didn't do it. And, I talked to my creative about it, and he actually asked me, he's like, well, did we get, I was like, no, it's just too much work and I didn't do it. We didn't have enough money or whatever my excuse was at the time. I didn't do it. And we made a promotional radio spot, with like guy mimicking Arlie Ermy or whatnot. Cut to about a year later, I had another project, and we had an opportunity to bring in a drill instructor. And I Googled Arlie Ermy, or found his contact information, called him, and he was in the recording studio. And 2 hours later, and I was like,
yeah, it was that easy.
It was that easy.
Yeah.
And the lesson I learned there was to always bring the highest level of creative to every project. Produce the shit out of everything. And that was the most valuable lesson in my entire life, because I still to this day draw upon that, executing the smallest thing to the biggest thing. If I want to call up Jody Hill, okay, like I don't know him, but I sure as hell know how to get to him. Or if I don't, I can figure it out. I know someone that does, right? Like, why not shoot for the top and make the best thing you could possibly make?
Yeah.
Settle for whatever because it's too hard or whatever. So that was, to me, a lesson in creativity and a lesson in this industry that I literally think about to this day.
Yeah.
Every time I enter a project, I've got Arlie Ermy yelling at me, why didn't you call me? I could have, and that's been a guiding light. And even in my, current situation where it's like, why can't I be a founder of a company? Like, why not try it? Why not put you're not going to get something what you put into it, right? So that was my greatest lesson, my first big lesson. And of course, there were many other things along the way, but that's the one that I feel there are tactical lessons and mess ups along the way that you learn. Okay, you need to budget that much, or, like, if you smell a director not being able to pull off what they said they could, fire them quickly and do move on. That's the one that gets me every time when I think about what an opportunity could be.
That's such a good one. That's such a good one because it's not to be patronizing, but it's quite brave actually, Tom, because I feel like I've been there and it's you just think it'll never happen, so what's the point in trying? And
too lazy, too scared, not confident, like, I mean, fuck, like, you got to, put your all into something if it's going to be good. Otherwise, what's the point?
Well, Tom, honestly, thank you so much. Thank you for giving us your time. And this was great. I just really enjoyed chatting to you about this stuff.
Yeah, of course, Orlando. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure. I'm so glad that we reconnected and
Me too.
That Superbloom and Kubrick, your baby, are coming together. And you guys are representing the next level of our technology strategy and what we're doing as a company. And I'm really excited to have that sort of forward thinking, 3.0 of what Superbloom is. I mean, that's what's going to make us very valuable and good. And it's just great to be working with you again. So
it's a real treat. I really enjoy it. It's great just to see your name, on the calendar invites, all the time. It's the best. I'm like, yeah, this is great. We get to do this again. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it again. And yeah, just thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.